morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's presentation, Feeling Like an Insider or Just a Means to an End, Equity and Inclusion in the Ontario Settlement Sector. Before we begin our presentation today, I would like to begin with an acknowledgement that N4 is hosted at CHEO, which is located in Ottawa, Ontario. Ottawa is built on unceded Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory, and the peoples of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe Nation have lived on this territory for millennia, and we honor them in this land. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. We also honor all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land that we get to live, play, work, and everything else on. My name is Andrew Tomeyer. I'm N4's Education Coordinator. I will be hosting and moderating today's presentation. I'm here with my colleague and co-host, Colleen Drake, N4's Project Engagement Coordinator, who will be monitoring the Q&A box today. And I'm now pleased to introduce you to our speakers and presenters today. Presenters, I'm going to ask that you turn on your video as I introduce you. Michaël Séguin is an assistant professor at the St. Paul University, Providence School of Transformative Leadership and Spirituality. He is currently leading this SSHRC-funded research in partnership with N4 that we will discuss today. Bianca Briciu is assistant professor at the School of Leadership, Ecology, and Equity at St. Paul University, and her work focuses on integral leadership development through emotional and social intelligence, mindfulness, compassion, and systems thinking. Her PhD is in cultural mediations, where she specialized in interdisciplinary approaches for intercultural competence. Welcome. Sahar Zohni has a master's and doctoral degree in pediatrics at Alexandria University in Egypt. She has over 25 years of clinical expertise as a clinician, lecturer, and researcher at El Shah by Pediatric University Hospital in Egypt, and during that time she managed pediatric intensive care units and renal units. She worked as a pediatric nephrology specialist in Nottingham, England, and she is currently the lead at N4. And finally, Reem Ali is City of Peterborough's first Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisor. She's passionate about fostering inclusion and belonging in her community and ensuring that opportunities for inclusion are intentionally created and supported. She's dedicated to supporting diversity and representation in all facets of her community and often reflects on her own intersectional experiences when supporting this work. Welcome everybody today. Now, before we get started in the presentation, I'd like to just take note that today's session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the N4 platform within the next week or so. All those that are registered and attending as well will be receiving a copy of this within the next week or so in their inbox. And should there be any technical issues, we will inform you with details for any sort of alternate makeup session. As well, before we begin, I'd like to just take a quick moment to introduce you to the Q&A box that is here on your screen today. We invite you to write your questions in the Q&A box, and if you have a similar question to ones that are already in there, you do have the option to upvote any questions. Please upvote questions you're interested in hearing the answer to, and we will prioritize which ones we ask our speakers today. Our presenters today do not have any conflicts of interest to disclose. So with that said, let's jump right into today's presentation. I will pass the virtual lectern over to our presenters. Take it away.
Thanks a lot, Andrew, and welcome everybody to our presentation today. And we're really very pleased to have you all. So good morning or good afternoon or even good evening, wherever you're joining us from. As a start, we would really like to know where you are coming from, like, you know, from which sector. So thanks, Andrew, for pulling that up. So if you can kindly just reflect on the sector you're coming from, and also share with us which province you're joining us from today, or of course, territory. So I think we're ready, Andrew, to pull data. Okay. So again, quite a mix there. So thank you everybody for joining us, and really hoping that this topic today that we are trying to reflect on would resonate with yourselves. So it has been a pleasure to partner with St. Paul University here in Ottawa on this important work, which we always say is just a start. We're just a start, and we're really hoping to take it even further. And this work is really just for us to kind of get a good understanding of, how impactful, right, is how impactful is EDI measures within settlement organizations, and how we can really help them. So this is really our stage 2, and the panelists will kindly share with you, what our next steps are. So maybe I'll go to the next one. So just to give you a bit of background, so N4, we are the National Newcomer Navigation Network. We're hosted here in Ottawa, Ontario, and actually we had a journey which really started in 2016, back in 2016, when we were hosted also at a hospital, so the Children's Hospital of Eastern Ontario, which is the capital hospital for children. And in 2016, 2017, when we started receiving a lot of Syrian refugee families who had very complex children who had complex need, it was very challenging for us as a hospital, and also, to receive those children, their families, and also to deal with our staff. Right, we really had to make sure that we have the right staff who could serve those children and families, and also we had to make sure that our ties with the community, with the settlement organizations, with school boards, and with other community health centers were kind of solid, so that we have kind of a centered plan for those children and their families to support them in their journey to settle in Ottawa and then maybe move to other cities. We started by creating what we call the Newcomer Navigation Program. So it was really around, understanding those resources and making sure that the hospital is involved and engaged to support those families. That program ended also by a need to form a toolkit, which we called Simplifying the Journey Toolkit. And the toolkit was really to help organizations identify what are their needs when they're looking at, welcoming newcomer families, and what do they need to change, right, within the organization to make sure that they align the resources or even apply for funding, further funding, right, and be part of the community that serves newcomers when they come to Canada. Out of that came an idea. We realized that, usually professionals from different sectors, they usually have kind of an association or, a place where they go to, right, for knowledge and for really sharing resources and maybe even meeting in conferences and so on, which was lacking when it comes to newcomer navigation. And this came up, with this idea of really applying for further funding. We applied for an SDI funding, and our hope was really to form a network from professionals who support immigrants and refugees in the healthcare and the settlement sector. And so we're not really, frontline providers, but we're really supporting their frontline providers in their different places. And that ended up with actually us getting the funding, and we, started our work. And now we are very proud that we have a network that extends from coast to coast to coast. And also we were joined by lots of academics, just like professors who are joining us today from, from St. Paul University. And we actually became partners, and I'll tell you in a minute what else have we done. Another mandate that was added to N4 that also reflects our keen work, to make sure that there is equity to newcomers who are from the healthcare sector, who are joining and coming to Canada with the hope to be part of the healthcare sector, came up in April of 2022, where we started looking at, how to integrate internationally educated healthcare professionals in the healthcare sector. Maybe I'll go to the next one. So given all this and this is the network, just a reflection of the network that we have. And we've been kind of in contact with more than 350 organizations. Very proud that we had this, actual site visits with them. Pre-COVID, it was in-person meetings, and post-COVID, we continue to have virtual meetings. And we have more than 2,000 members. So maybe that's what really, knowing the settlement sector, knowing the organizations, having worked with them, we became, I think, a good partner for this work that's coming up that we will tell you about in a minute. Maybe I'll go to the next one. So yes, we are committed to EDI, as I mentioned, since day one back in 2016, when we started, really highlighting there is a need for improving the newcomer experience, right, by really supporting the staff and making sure that they have the right communities of support, and really supporting the staff was our main goal. Having an opportunity to share resources and make sure that they're well informed. So we launched our website, newcomernav.ca, and it's a free website that's totally funded by IRCC. We also had an opportunity to partner with St. Paul University here in Ottawa, a bilingual university, who are very keen and have years and years of experience in EDI work, where we had two programs, one around really supporting the staff to understand newcomer navigation and get a certificate, a one-year certificate online program. And now we have another program that we're running for internationally educated healthcare professionals that St. Paul is providing. We have been collaborating directly with internationally educated healthcare professionals, and we launched for them what we call an internationally educated healthcare professional resource hub, which has everything that they would need, including the pathways and understanding the pathways to licensure in Canada. Lastly, I will just talk quickly about, our current partnership is one of the very important partnerships that has been going for a year now around this research that I'll hand over to the team to tell you more about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sahar. It's always a pleasure to work together, to work with you and with the whole team at N4. And so just to jump directly into this research and our results. So our starting point is that we know, you all know, how much work the settlement sector is doing in Canada to welcome newcomers, how much work the settlement sector is doing in Ontario. And we wanted to know basically how far is the settlement sector walking the talk when it comes to inclusion, but not inclusion of the newcomers who are clients, but inclusion of the newcomers who are newcomers who become themselves frontline workers. And we really wanted to dig more deeply into the experience of these frontline workers. And so what we did is that basically we entered through and formed partnership with 8 organizations, with 8 settlement agencies across Ontario, and we interviewed 27 frontline workers and 8 managers to get to know a bit more about their own experience, and when it comes to the managers, about the policies in place in these various settlement organizations. And what we wanted to look at is the climate of inclusion. So how much are these settlement agencies creating an atmosphere, creating a workplace where people feel that they can be themselves, where they can belong, and while at the same time being fully part of the mission. And we look using a tool from a US scholar from Nishi. We look at 3 different dimensions: integration of differences, inclusion in decision making, and equitable employment practices. And so I'll just share a few of the results coming out from this research. And there's a report that is now available where you get not all the result, but most of the results. So I will briefly scan or surf over the result in the next few minutes, just to give you a glimpse of what is coming out of this research. So in terms of integration of differences, we see a strong culture of celebration of differences, though celebration of some differences, especially cultural differences, more than others. Probably religious differences that sometimes might be less celebrated, or differences also related to sexual diversity. And so all in all, we can say that the sector is pretty strong in terms of for all employees to be able to be oneself at work. It's not perfect, but 88% of the employees we interview said that either they agree or strongly agree that they can be their true self at work. And part of the strategies or the means helping us to be themselves at work, we can see stuff like being able to speak their mother tongue on the job, being able to bring their own food or to cook their own culturally appropriate food in the workplace, to wear the clothes that they want, and also to be celebrating different holidays like Rosh Hashanah for Jews, or to celebrate the Eid for Muslim. But it's not everyone who felt that they can be completely themselves in the workplace. On this slide, the percentage is a bit is tiny, but still a few of them told us that, well, it's not that easy. There's a mold and you need to conform to this mold. There's a kind of a good immigrant that we're looking at within some of the organizations. And that is preempting some of the workers to bring their whole self to work. And as we can see in the slide in front of us, that is not something that is showing up from white folks, but that's certainly something that is there for racialized people. And we'll see this racial gap for most of the slides that we'll look at. Another dimension we look at is the issue of accommodation. And again, the organizations that we met, the people that we interviewed, said that that they can fairly well be accommodated in their organizations. We saw that 85% of the workers said that their organization is valuing a work-life balance, and there are various means to promote that. For example, to have a teleworking policy, to have a right to disconnect after work hours. In some instances, there's a 4-day-a-week week of work. In other places, there are extended summer long weekends or more flexibility around vacations or personal leave days. But again, some people told us that, yeah, it's possible to get accommodated, but some of it is up to the discretion of the manager. And sometimes it's also a way to put you on the spot and to increase the stigmatization because you're asking for an accommodation. So it seems to be good in theory, but it's not always the case in practice. And finally, when we look at for this dimension of integration of differences, do people feel value for who they are? We see a percentage that is a bit lower this time. 72% of the people, of the frontline workers we interviewed, said that they agree that they are not only value for the job they do, but also for the person that they are. And something a bit surprising, I mean, so at least surprising for me, that came out of the research is that many workers relate to their workplace as a family or a friendly environment where they can develop friendship, where they can grow with others. And a lot of them said that social gatherings played an important role in their sense of belonging to their settlement agencies. So stuff like eating together, going for a walk together during lunchtime, but also having activities outside of work where people can support each other. But again, for sure, and especially for racialized workers, it's not everyone who is feeling this friendly family atmosphere in the workplace. And we can tie that up with the slides that we saw before, that for people, someone feeling that there's a mold and that they need to conform to the culture, for sure, the friendliness is not that exciting, let's say. The second dimension we were looking at is the issue of inclusion in decision-making. And that's something that often when we talk about EDI, we don't look. We look at if people can feel that they can belong, they can be their true self, etc. But we don't often look at decision-making and how much people are involved in decision-making. So we wanted to go a bit deeply in that dimension. And what we saw is that there might be some place for improvement. So we asked the question to frontline workers, but also to managers, how much that they felt that all employees can contribute, how much their input is being sought after. And what we saw basically is that 72% of frontline workers agree that leaders actively seek their input. But again, with an important gap between racialized and non-racialized staff. So 100% of the non-racialized staff felt that, oh, yeah, sure, where our input is being asked. But when it comes to racialized people, it's only 71% of the people we interviewed. They said, yeah, that the management is actively looking after the input. And this is very important because for frontline workers who felt that their input is being sought after, they said that it was great because in such circumstances, their manager is going after them as a source of client information. Their manager is looking for their thoughts when it comes to improving services. They are invited to react when it comes to policy drafts, and they are also involved in strategic planning. So this kind of involvement is helping people to feel that they really belong to the settlement agency, to their workplace. But for sure, as we see with the result in front of us, some people feel that they are more consulted than others, that the opinion of some, to some extent, might be of more value than the opinion of others. And that's a challenge. Another thing that we ask is that how much this input is being considered afterwards in redefining work practices or rethinking work practices. And again, what we saw is that 64% of the frontline workers agreed with the statement saying that their input, the input of all the employees is having an impact. But again, we saw a gap between racialized and non-racialized. For non-racialized people, 83% of the people that we interviewed agreed that their input is being sought and having an impact. And it's only 55% for racialized people. And on that note, a few of the racialized employees that we interviewed noted in their workplace a gap between frontline workers and the management team, saying that often the managers or the ED, the top decision makers, are white Canadian-born, and the frontline are immigrants, racialized immigrants, and that it can create a gap, a hiatus, when decisions are being made without consulting the frontline who went through migration, are in touch on the daily basis with newcomers, whereas it's not the case of most of the leaders, most of the managers. So long term, this can create some frustration and, again, having an impact on the sense of belonging and inclusion. And one last item I'd like to cover on the issue of inclusion in decision-making is the issue of autonomy and empowerment. And so all in all, 60% of frontline workers felt that they are empowered to do to make decisions on their own, work-related decisions. And again, we saw this gap between 83% of non-racialized workers agreeing with that versus 56% of racialized workers. And so what are the kind of decisions that employees feel is empowering them? Well, having control on their work schedule, being able to decide by themselves how best to serve a client within broader guidelines, being treated like an adult, and also being able from time to time to take risk in the way they choose to serve a client. And the flip side of it is micromanagement. And that is, of course, not the best way to go, whatever the situation. And so, again, that's another layer to add to that is empowering empowerment of frontline workers. The last, the key dimension that we had to look at is fair employment practices. And that's probably the area, without any big surprise for most people watching this webinar, that's the area where there is more space for growth, but also the area where it's more difficult to some extent for settlement agencies to take full control of what it involves. So the first thing we look at is the recruitment process. And so 72% of frontline workers thought that the recruitment practices in their organization was fair. And on that note, the result is the picture is a bit less bright for racialized people, but it's not that different from racialized and non-racialized folks. So on the bright side of things, many people told us that the way the credentials and foreign credentials are being considered is great. The way we encourage and we recognize the skills of people applying in the settlement sector is great. Also, the way we value previous experience, including having worked as a volunteer in a settlement agency, are all good practices and great way to go forward in terms of them feeling included and feeling that the hiring process is fair. But on the let's say not the dark side, but the side where there's more place for improvement, a few people noted that it's not everyone that has their credentials being recognized. So there seems to be, again, some space for improvement on that. And also a few people noted that, again, today, there are still people who are being hired because of the linguistic skills. So not necessarily because they are coming with the background needed to do the job, but because they speak the language needed to serve an airplane of Afghan refugees or Ukrainian refugees arriving next week. And so this is leading to the feeling that some people, some employees are token employees. Another aspect where there's space for improvement is in terms of the promotion process. And on this one and the next one, the salary one, the numbers are a bit different and a bit more telling. So all in all, only 44% of employees we interviewed found that the promotion process was fair. And again, this time we see a very big gap between racialized and non-racialized. For non-racialized folks, 66% find it fair, whereas it's only 33% for from racialized folks. And so for people who agreed that the process was fair, a few of them named that it was a formal process in their settlement agency, which is great. And others mentioned that the process might not be that clear, but there's hope that one day maybe I can become manager, since other newcomers have been working and climbing the scale, the ladder within my organizations. So that's giving me hope. But on the other side, people told us that the process is not that clear and not that fair, because oftentimes there's no formal process. When there's one, the process can be very opaque. We don't really know what is happening. There might be suspicion of favoritism because the way managers or supervisor are getting involved in the process. And also, sometimes there's a perception of discrimination, especially when it comes to the degree of mastery of the English language involved. By the same token, I won't surprise anyone with the issue of salary. So only 43% of frontline workers agree that they were receiving equal pay for equal work. Again, we saw a big gap between racialized and non-racialized. And when we look a bit more deeply into what it entails, well, a few people told us that the salary and benefit are not enough to make a living. Others told us that the salary and benefits are inadequate compared with other settlement agencies, sometimes across the street, or with government social services that are providing similar services. And the other employees also told us that the salaries and benefits are inadequate for the nature and the volume of the work that they do in comparison with similar work. For example, work counselors, and often acting in the same building, but not receiving the same source of funding. So again, this can be a very important source, not only of frustration, but also of turnover over the longer term. And so in conclusion, before we go to the recommendations, we said that in terms of integration of differences, the settlement agencies we met are doing well. There's always space for improvement, but they are doing great, especially on the cultural side of things. In terms of empowerment empowerment and inclusion in decision making, there are some consultations, but some people felt more consulted than others. And when it comes to decision making, people felt that they are not always being heard. And in terms of equity in employment, that's probably where there's more space to improve, especially when it comes to issues of promotion, of being more intentional about promotion, about being maybe able to plan a bit more in terms of career pathway for people who would like to move forward in the organizations, but also to be able to think more in terms of what is possible to do for more fairness in terms of salaries.
Thank you, Michaël, and thank you, Sahar, and also thank you everyone for joining us today. I will continue with the recommendations. And because we have quite a lot of recommendations, in fact, in the report, there are over 40 recommendations. I chose some of them to present today, and I would like to propose a little exercise for you. We will have 5 different categories of recommendations, and I would invite you to count those that you experience in your organization already, those that are in place, and maybe to write down one in each category where you think there is room for improvement or for growth in your own organization. And hopefully you can take back some ideas, either as a manager or as an employee in different organizations, just because I wouldn't want to preach so many different recommendations for the time that we have together. So the first category for recommendations is about fostering an environment where people feel safe to reveal their authentic selves. So this is about that creation of space for differences, especially in the case of immigrant employees. So the first one is celebrating culturally diverse holidays, and Michaël already mentioned how many of our interviewees talked about the ability to do so and how that made them feel welcome in different organizations. Offering worker-centered accommodations based on cultural, religious, family, and mental health needs, and also recognizing, the different needs for different situations and different people, and being able to move away from one rule for all to understanding of various contexts and situations that people are in. Creating a diversity committee in charge of raising awareness of cultural differences. These are all creating more space for the celebration of differences in the workplace. Other two that are important are to create safe means for workers from marginalized communities to talk about their experiences of microaggressions or exclusion. So this is particularly important because if organizations don't have that space, that tends to create an experience of mistrust and also sometimes turnover. The last one in this category is increasing to LGBTQI+ representation and support, because as Michaël mentioned, some differences are more welcome than others, and while cultural differences are more celebrated, other types of differences are less visible and sometimes there is less space for them. So the next category, if Michaël, you would move the cursor, please, is fostering a family-like environment where people feel cared for and valued for who they are. In the other category is about creating and opening the space for difference. And this one is about making that space feel like a caring and inclusive space. And we talked about the metaphor of the family that many employees were using when they spoke to us in the interviews. And when they refer to family, they refer to this friendly environment that is caring, where they can feel comfortable to share with others, and they feel a strong connections with their coworkers. So the first recommendation is understanding and honoring individual needs and concerns, both at the team and at the managerial level. Allowing time, space, and opportunities for workers to create their own socializing activities, such as common eating areas. And also socializing activities are highly valued by everyone we interviewed. Addressing conflict in an informal, collegial way as a first step, and then have formal processes in place when this doesn't work. In many of the responses we received, people didn't really know what steps were in place for addressing conflict, and sometimes it was not addressed. Creating opportunities for collaboration within one's team and also across departments. So this is again about building strong connections, both within the team and with other departments. And the last one is developing inclusive leadership capacities, such as open-mindedness, care, empathy, trust, and nonviolent communication, which are traits of what an inclusive leader could look like, and also looks like in their own engagement with their employees. The recommendation in the category about inclusion in decision-making, now we tried to, as you see, to match these recommendations according to the findings. And we want to highlight that some of these recommendations were given directly by our interviewees, whereas some recommendations are as a result of our own findings in the research. So in this category of empowering employees by inclusion in decision-making, the first recommendation is seeking employee anonymous input and feedback through surveys, meetings, emails, intranet, and newsletters. So actually paying attention to their voice and listening to the voice of employees, which is very important. Creating good communication flow and sharing information effectively using various platforms like Facebook, WhatsApp, and Teams. Including workers' suggestions and opinions, both in job-related decisions and decisions about policies and practices, especially those that have a direct impact on employees, As you saw in what Michaël shared, there is enough attention paid and desired to listen to the voices of employees, but the second part of that, which is integrating and responding to their concerns and their ideas, sometimes is lacking. Avoiding micromanagement and control based on hierarchical roles and encouraging accompaniment based on knowledge of the field. So respecting the knowledge that workers have as they interact with their clients. And the fifth one flows from the fourth one, developing leadership trust in expertise that comes from frontline and lived experience. The next category of recommendation is about building equitable employment practices, and this was the area where we found most concerns in our research. The first recommendation is to develop more complex and inclusive hiring criteria that value experience, skills, international credentials, and candidates' levels of motivation. Creating job postings based on inclusive language and ways of thinking, creating diverse hiring panels of at least 3 people sensitive to intercultural differences. So really paying attention to one's hiring practices in order to integrate these measures based on an EDI lens. Recognition of international credentials and experience in promoting immigrant employee. Creating transparent and public communication about promotion opportunities. As you saw in our research findings, there is quite a lot of opacity in terms of promotion opportunities and sometimes even suggestions of favoritism. And the last category for recommendations is providing fair compensation and building the capacity of employees. And sometimes these measures can be within the power of organizations or leaders in organizations to do, and sometimes they need to, I would say, to address themselves some of the systemic inequities that exist in the larger system. So the first recommendation is to gather annual data about salary inequities and compare them with the OCASI annual salary survey. So paying attention to how much my own organization pays compared to other organizations, and also the differential levels of payment. Addressing gaps between salaries for certain types of work that reflect social discrimination. For example, what we found interesting is that employees who work in accompanying newcomers are usually the lowest paid compared to employees who accompany people in looking for work, right? So there is a sort of almost unconscious leveling of these different job categories, and usually the caring jobs are at the bottom of the ladder. Offering more training for managers on EDI and inclusive leadership, and offering more opportunities for cross-cultural education and awareness of different traditions, and leveraging training opportunities offered by umbrella organizations, for example, like N4 here, and or creating cross-agency exchanges and cooperation initiatives. This is also something that it's possible to do for different organizations. And now I would like to end with the next steps and also to see your level of interest in this topic of research. We intend to continue the second phase of this research with a focus on inclusive leadership, just because both Michaël and I are in the School of Leadership, Ecology and Equity. So we hope for this second phase of the research to create a systemic analysis of EDI in the settlement sector in Canada, comparing 2 or more provinces and seeing how different provinces have different practices, developing inclusive leadership through communities of practice. So inviting leaders to gather together and reflect on their experiences in the field while using different tools and strategies to develop their inclusive lens. collaborating with individual settlement agencies for EDI capacity building, either through training of the employees or training of their leaders or managers. So please feel free to reach out to us if you would like to collaborate at inclusionresearch@ustpol.ca. We will be very happy to connect with you. So I will end here, and I will invite Reem to respond. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And hello to everyone. And I just want to start by saying I'm so grateful for the opportunity to have been included on the advisory circle for this project. It's very personal and professional for me. So I'll just take the next few minutes to maybe highlight some of the things that kind of stood out for me from this project, and also just offer a couple of things for us to maybe reflect on, and especially in light of possibly there being a second phase to this project. So I think for me, one of the things that really, a statement that would summarize all of this is that it's something I often use in the DEI trainings that I deliver, and that is inclusion is not a natural consequence of diversity. And we see that manifesting very clearly in the settlement sector, particularly as we explore the makeup of the settlement organizations. It also leads me to kind of focus on what the research is showing us as what makes inclusion possible, and that's a focus on processes and practices and relationships. And we see that coming through and through very clearly in the results as well. And that, for me, also connects very closely to the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Benchmarks document tool that kind of explores 5 different areas that we can use to root our DEI work. Compliance and competence and performance and human dignity are valuable reasons for why we do DEI work. But for me, what really ties it all together is a foundational understanding that at the end of the day, we really want to be doing work that is seeking social justice. And I think that part as well is coming out loud and clear in the responses by the folks who contributed to the research results, in that they are seeking that social justice for themselves as well, in not only for their clients or the folks that they're supporting, but also for themselves within these employment opportunities. I think, one of the things that I'm cautious about, and I also see we're cautious about in the research as well, is that labeling around, family structures, or these agencies offering some sort of family structure as well. Because as we're well aware, not all family structures are healthy. Some family structures are quite toxic, or can be quite toxic. And I think it offers, sometimes, if that's the labeling that we're using, sometimes it offers like a way out, or an excuse for us to demonize or humiliate some folks, and then label them as being either difficult or disrespectful. Because again, if we're looking at a very hierarchical family structure, where respect is kind of expected from the people below the management level, and it's not mutual, then it becomes, again, a very easy way for us to label folks as being disrespectful when they're really coming forward to offer opinions, or ask to be included, or even acknowledged for their work. Again, another thing that stood out for me is this idea that, we often look at settlement organizations, or the settlement sector in particular, as sort of being that manifestation of Canadian multiculturalism. And I think that's positive, but also, again, we need to be a little bit cautious about that, because we end up focusing mostly on the successes of multiculturalism, or what we perceive as successes, and avoid looking at the shortcomings, because at the end of the day, that shakes our image of being a welcoming community if we start to focus on the shortcomings. And so likewise, one of the comments that struck me really is, I believe one of the participants kind of referencing their autonomy around their work by saying that I can run things as I like, as long as it shows the success of our clients and our organizations. And so again, for me, that not only perpetuates that sort of good and grateful immigrant image and stops there, but it also dismisses the full reality of what the lived and living experiences of newcomers are, is that it's not always about success. There's a lot of difficult issues that newcomers end up having to face, and often alone, particularly if we're ignoring the systemic and foundational reasons for why these issues actually exist. And I think that also translates into how we're seeing that difference between, what we value as work around the employment side of things versus the settlement side of things, because it again focuses on the successes of a transactional approach rather than the focus on valuing the relational ideas behind that as well. I think I'm just going to end by maybe bringing up something that really at the end of the research project and reading the excellent paper that's come out of that, it's something that I feel I'd love to see be taken up in the second phase as we look at inclusive leadership. Realizing, of course, recognizing the scope and limitations of this particular project, but I would invite us to look at the role of boards, governance boards in the settlement sector for these charitable organizations. And I say this because what again I was seeing in all of the results is the clear discrepancy and disconnect, really, at the end of the day, between the responses that we were receiving from folks who are in the management at these organizations and the staff, and beyond that, even within staff, between the racialized and non-racialized staff. I think that disconnect is signaling that something is missing, that folks in the management levels are rarely, if ever, I think, if I've noticed, disagreed with anything, right? It's like maybe they're neutral, if any, but they're often agreeing and strongly agreeing, whereas we're seeing the racialized folks often showing a little bit of disagreement. So that to me is really signaling that we're not listening to the staff. We're not realizing that what they may be perceiving is worthy of us just being a little bit humble around our perceptions. And so that level of humility, that engaging management to say, okay, let's be a little bit vulnerable and speak to what staff may want us to focus on, I think is a role that the board can play. Boards are unfortunately often also made up of predominantly white folks who, in this sector, from my experience, are often joining these boards to help ease their feelings of shame and guilt around perhaps racism or discrimination, or wanting to feel empowered in the way that they're seeing immigrants. So again, there's a lot of power that boards of governance hold in terms of holding these organizations accountable, management accountable to best practices around inclusion, to ensure that there are proper channels and policies that exist for staff to address issues that may be generated through bias. And also to help correct the false perceptions that may be presented by management, so that there is room for staff to actually come forward and feel that their needs are being not only listened to, but also properly and addressed in a participatory manner.
Excellent. Thank you for that input as well, Reem. And thank you again for the presentation. We do have a few questions before we wrap things up, and we very much want to get to all of our audience questions. The one that I had on my mind, just alongside the comments from Reem, was there any sort of look into effective integration versus tokenization? That's the right term?
Sorry, was there work?
Was there looking into effective integration into the workplace compared to tokenism?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and again, my experience may be limited, but there is a lot of, for a sector that in my mind should be modeling what effective integration should look like. We're still seeing, tokenism play out very similarly to any other sector. And again, it's because we see visible diversity on the outside. And so we imagine that there is inclusion. And diversity, there's invisible elements to diversity that should be equally cared for and considered as well. But again, to other organizations on the outside or other sectors, we look at the sector, we see that visible diversity, so we think automatically inclusion, integration. I actually feel that we have a long way to go in putting together like a model for integration, because we're kind of always focused on those transactional results, right? Employment numbers, but we're not looking at those phases of integration for newcomers that very much are focused on the social aspect, especially early on, that then can generate some of these successes that we're looking at maybe in the longer term, but we end up flipping it where we want to see those numbers early on around employment, but we're not really focused on the relational aspect. So yeah, I do see tokenisms continuing to be very much the case rather than meaningful inclusion.
Right. As well from our audience, what are your thoughts on moving to professionalization credentializing within the sector? Professionalization better recognizes the skills people bring to these often complex jobs and can encourage better pay. However, this could create barriers for those who are internationally trained or educated.
That's a very good question. I mean, what we saw at least in the interviews we did with managers, in that organizations that seems to be moving away from tokenism, or at least from a more utilitarian hiring of people because of their language, are moving towards some kind of professionalization, because they are looking, do people have a degree in social work or in counseling or in a discipline that is related to the settlement work that they do, and where they are better trained also to deal with the emotional labor involved in the settlement work. So is professionalization all of the answer? I'm not sure. I didn't study or think enough about it, but for sure there's a tendency where we see it becoming more and more an answer in bigger agencies, especially in big cities like Toronto, where people also can choose from a broader pool of potential resources or human resources. But maybe Sahar or Bianca or Reem, you have something more to say that is more informed than me on professionalization.
I think if I can add here just something real quick, and that is, when it's great that these organizations sometimes are not focused necessarily on like the credentials. I think it's again the appearance that we're not focused on credentials. We care about a lot of other things. Sometimes those other things are limited to language and culture. There's sort of pros and cons to this. On the one hand, it's good to not only focus on credentials, but on the other hand, we're not seeing that mirroring in other sectors. So other sectors continue to focus on credentials and not so much bring in those relational skills. And what that sometimes ends up signaling to the folks who are working in the settlement sector is that you're not going to get a job anywhere else. This is as good as it gets for you. You're not going to be able to make more money elsewhere. And so, I think that is closely interconnected with some of what we're seeing play out in terms of organizations in the settlement sector not maybe doing more to ensure that integration and inclusion, because they know that there's a large pool of people who are looking for work, and because the other sectors are not catching up in terms of inclusive best practices. and focusing on credentials, and these folks are, newcomers that don't have that, then we're kind of reinforcing this idea that there's nothing better, that you're just going to be, put your head down and do your work. So I think, there's problems there that we can all collectively as a society work to improve in terms of that inclusive nature in these organizations.
Excellent, thank you. And I think we have time for just one final question. Did you hear from organizations about their perceptions of organizational capacity to implement EDI initiatives?
I can just jump very quickly on that one. And we heard from some of the managers and also from some of the employees about certain limits in implementing changes in organizations. So for example, the salary scale or the amount of salary depends on funding, which depends on applying to the government for funds, and organizations are limited in that sense. There were, I think that as we engaged with different leaders and managers, they were reflecting on their own power to make certain changes in the organizations versus employees sometimes talking about the lack of power to make changes, right? They bring their voices forward, but sometimes those voices may not be heard or responded to. So I think that they addressed these, I would say, relational power dynamics in organizational change, some of the limits and some of the possibilities. I don't know if Michaël or Reem, if you want to add to that.
Well, I think that one of the important takeaway from the research is that you don't always need a huge budget to implement EDI. For sure, stuff related to HR, you might need more money, but there's a lot when it comes to, again, involvement in decision making, or to create an environment where everyone can be oneself and belong. That can be done without huge resources. And I think that as part of the conversation that we had with many organizations as we are preparing for the next step, is that they were reflecting that they would like to do more. They would like to be involved in thinking about different practices that they can implement within their context. So I think that organizational capacities are there. It's simply a matter of better equipping people. And also, I mean, I'm a strong believer in in-house responses and in-house solution. Starting by sitting together, yeah, for sure, managers from different organizations having a chat among themselves about how they can develop a more inclusive type of leadership and how they can address different issues, but also starting working groups and launching different initiatives to listen more to what people want, what they can do, what they feel is needed. I mean, settlement workers themselves, all probably 90% of the answer that they need. The rest of the 10% might be coming from a bit of best practices from outside or listening to various experiences, but a lot can be done in-house simply by and I know that time is a precious resource, and the settlement sector is short of money and short of time. But the more space we can make, the better it will be to move the needle in the best way, the more equitable way for the workers themselves.
Thank you. And before we just wrap things up for the webinar, once again, thank you. What is the best way to get updates about the future research that's happening? Is that through the inclusion research at UST?
Yeah, I mean, if you'd like to know more, get involved, email us. And for the rest, I mean, Sahar already said that N4 is committed to work with us. Well, not only Sahar, Christine Curry, the whole team at N4 is committed to work with us for the next phase. So you will certainly hear from us in the next coming months as we move forward and and in partnership. It's important to repeat that. It's a research in partnership. It's not only Bianca and I sitting in our office at St. Paul saying, oh, let's do a research. That's a way that academics are really good at that, but we really want it to be something relevant. And that's why we crafted this research in partnership with N4, rooted in the experience of N4, and also having people like you, Reem, involved, who has a huge experience in both EDI and the settlement sector. So if you'd like to get involved or simply have a chat with us to share some of your preoccupations as we want to go ahead with the next phase, please reach out.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And to wrap things up for today, once again, thank you so much, Bianca, Michaël, Sahar, and Reem, for being available and taking time to participate in today's discussion. I know that our audience has learned a lot about the research, and we've sent along the report that's been developed so far. And many thanks to you, the audience, for joining with us and engaging with us today. You'll very much welcome to join us again for any of our upcoming events as well. And if you missed any of our presentation today or would like to watch this session again, we will be posting the recording within the next week or so to the N4 platform known as the meeting place at newterminavigation.ca. We will be moving any of the questions that we didn't get a chance to address, as well as being available to answer any additional questions on the meeting place that you would like addressed on the meeting place post as well with this recording. We've invited our presenters to respond to your questions there as well. We also curated several resources related to today's presentation topic, and you can find these in a resource toolkit, and we will link them when we send the on-demand version of this presentation as well. So if you haven't yet, please sign up to newterminavigation.ca for all our resources and learning opportunities. As well, following today's session, you'll be invited to complete a survey to share your feedback with N4. These surveys help us continuously improve and seek out new webinar content that is relevant to the topics that you are interested in. Along with that, feel free to check out our ITP and IEN pathways available on the N4 website at newterminavigation.ca/ITP-pathways and newterminavigation.ca/IEN-pathways.